think of the future and see projections. He felt very prophetic, very clairvoyant. Something had been done to him to really stimulate his mind. It's quite possible at this point something had been done in his mind to alter it, perhaps even grow extra neurons to store information. Later we're going to learn, and I'll tell you a little bit more about it, how information and wisdom from your spirit is stored in the brain. And we'll see that at the age of 7, this is probably what was done to Billy. Well, after the device was taken off, Svath explained to them that the knowledges and things that he had now learned and been exposed to would now become a part of him, that they had been opened up into his thoughts, and they would now be, his knowledges forever. Something else had also been done. Some sort of block had been put into his mind so that if someone else tried to pry into his thoughts, either telepathically, hypnotically, or whatever, or drug inducement of some type, that there was a block put into his thoughts so that couldn't happen. In other words, his knowledges were being protected. Svath went on to explain a little bit more about his mission. By the way, when this is happening now, this is the summer of 1944. And he explains to Billy that in the following year, August of 1945, remember World War II is on, that an event not unlike Sodom and Gomorrah would happen, but it would happen in Japan. And this was the event of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, where in August of 45, the bombs were dropped. This was one of the first prophetic things that the ETs began to tell Billy about. Okay. Well, after that 4 hours, Billy was returned down to Earth. He never saw Svath again. The telepathic contacts continued throughout his younger years. He was only 7 there. And on his 16th birthday, February 3rd, on his 16th birthday, was the last time he heard from Svath. Svath's voice came into his head at that time on his birthday. It was very weak, very old, and kind of feeble sounding, but he'd grown quite accustomed to it at that point. The voice died out and disappeared, and that was the last time he ever heard from him. It was only a couple hours after that a new voice came into his head. The new voice had a feminine sound. The new voice said that her name was Ascot, and that she would be taking over his education. She knew Svath very well, and that from now on she would be coming into his thoughts, and his education now would be stepped up. Apparently she was far more advanced than this man Svath was, and now that Billy was older and his younger education had kind of had a basic ground laying now, it would be possible for her to introduce him to many new wonders. She told him that they would be going on time travel, they'd be going to other worlds, and many experiences that would help with his education. Now remember, this is only 16. In the contact notes, the information about his travels with Ascot and so forth aren't down till several books off into it. And I'm going to try to kind of present the information in kind of the same time frame as they happen in the contact notes. So I'm going to skip on down and go into his other contacts with the Pleiadians, and we'll come back later on and I'll tell you more and more about his years with Ascot and those particular contacts. But just to give you a brief idea, those contacts were telepathic, started at 16. He had several physical contacts with her, time traveling, like I did mention, and to different time frames and different experiences. He traveled through India and other countries and wound up back home when he was 27 with his wife, Poppy. And it wasn't until January, much later in 1975, on January 28th, when his contacts then began with the Pleiadians. Up to this point, Ascot was not a Pleiadian. She was from another race. So at this point, we pick up and we move up to January 28th, 1945, when very unexpectedly, Billy's first contact with the Pleiadians began. I say unexpectedly because even though he was told that he was going to have the contacts later in life, he wasn't expecting them then. He was told they wouldn't start until a year after that. So he was quite surprised one afternoon when he was working out on the farm, when he felt this peculiar sensation come into him again. Some thoughts were forcing their way into him, and he was a little surprised because, like I said, he wasn't expecting it. Well, this new voice came in and introduced herself. It was a female voice again. And new images and new pictures came into his mind, which he had learned to interpret over the years. He knew what these symbols and pictures meant. He knew they were coming, and he was being directed to get on his moped, bring his camera, and she was directing him to a particular site. He was about to have his first contact with a new teacher. Well, Billy hops on his moped and proceeds to follow the information that's coming to him in his thoughts. And it turns out he's got quite a ride to go. He starts riding through his local village, and people are looking out the window and watching him. And Billy has already earned a reputation around, for being a rather unique person, just throughout his childhood and his teens and so forth, always having these strange experiences and missing so much and being thought of as kind of a troublemaker. He already had, kind of rather odd looks from people when he would drive through the village. Today, if they only knew what he was going to, they would really have some interesting looks for him, because he's on his way out for his first contact. The telepathic transmissions that come into him, he keeps feeling this cooling sensation on his forehead, by the way, that always lets him know that thoughts are going to be coming from them. He drives his moped out, and he's actually almost an hour away before he gets to the location that he's been led to. When he gets there, he gets off his moped and he notices that there's a truck on the other side of the road, just parked aside of the road. Apparently who's ever driving the truck had wandered off into the forest. It was a German truck, judging from the license plate. Billy waited a few minutes and he had his camera with him. And then he felt something was about to happen, which it did. It only took a minute or two, and this silver disc-like object appeared, come swooping down out of the sky, completely quiet, and was floating just a couple 100 meters behind the truck over the trees. Well, Billy grabbed a picture real fast. He knew from previous experience that these things move very quickly and usually disappeared, and it was very hard to get a picture of them. So he snapped a picture right away as fast as he could before it disappeared. The ship floated around a little bit and then kept moving away. And a little farther down the road, Billy snapped another picture. Then suddenly the ship kind of shot away. Billy got on his moped. He was again led to move down the road, which he did a few 100 yards down the road. Parked his moped again, and noticed down the road that the German truck was moving away, and he was now left alone out here in the forest. He noticed a minute or two later that the birds were taking flight. Animals all over were, somehow sensing something was going to happen, and they took off. Well, the silver disc reappeared, and this time it came down very gently and set down on the ground. Well, Billy snapped another picture of it and started walking towards it. He said in his own words he was feeling rather cheeky, and he was very comfortable about this. He was actually getting kind of excited. He started walking towards the ship, trying to take another picture. He only got about 100 meters from the ship, and suddenly he couldn't get any closer. His progress was blocked by some unseen force. Some sort of energy around the ship was keeping him from getting any closer, and he couldn't move in. It was very gentle. He said it was like wind. You would move in. You didn't feel wind, but you just couldn't go any farther. They were just pushing back very gently. So he sat down underneath the tree and wait, because he was quite sure that someone would come out of the ship, and they did. It was only about a minute, and he noticed someone coming from behind the ship and walking towards him. He immediately noticed their clothes. They had on kind of a tight-fitting type of jumpsuit, and he was quickly reminded of like an elephant skin that he had seen at the zoo. That's how he described the clothes that this person had on. As the person got closer, it became apparent that she was a girl. She had very long, kind of reddish blonde hair and appeared to be a young woman, very nice looking. And his first feelings that he got about her were very peaceful and nothing haughty, seemed to be a very pleasant, open, kind sort of person. He picked up on this right away. And he was immediately struck also with the fact that she was very pretty and very nice looking. He remarks in his notes that she was very pretty. But he says she doesn't act pretty. She didn't act like a woman who was aggressively trying to use her looks or whatever. She was just a very pleasant, down-to-earth sort of person. He was still sitting under the tree when she walked up. She extended her hand, which he took, and pulled him up. Billy only has one arm at this point. He, on his travels when he was going through India and Greece, he had lost his left arm in a bus accident. A bus had hit his car and taken his arm off. So he only had the one right arm at this point. In his earlier contacts, he had two arms. So he stood up, and they began to talk, and she says, let's walk over by where your moped is, and they sit down on the grass, and she says, today, this will be our first contact, and I don't have time for you to ask questions. I have a lot of things to explain to you. And she says, then later on, I'll allow you to ask questions at other contacts. And he kind of interrupted her, and, as she was talking, and said, well, who are you, and why have you come in here? And she remarked, well, for quite some time that her people had wanted to find someone who could help them in their mission to make things clear to the people of Earth. On several occasions, they had tried to have contacts with various people.